Hey YouTube, welcome back to another History Teacher Reacts video. Mr. Terry, as I continue my search for historical knowledge found here on YouTube. Alright, today we are starting the series from Extra History on the 1918 flu pandemic, which is the biggest pandemic that has happened in the world in the last 100 years and far longer. And I think what we're going to be doing here going through this series is actually one of the most important things, I honestly think, that I've covered in my short time here on YouTube, mostly because of the pandemic going on right now. If you're watching right here in 2020, you know what I'm talking about, and then I'm sure we're going to be talking about a lot in the future, the COVID-19 pandemic, global pandemic, because this is what has been referred to a lot when people try to find precedent for a global pandemic in the modern era. People usually go back to this and are basing a lot of things, I think, on how this was handled, even though, again, it's over 100 years ago. But there's a lot of parallels that people are talking about. I think it's a really, really important time to look at the best precedent. And again, that meaning something we have seen that you can base thing off before in making, some decisions today. Again, although we're 100 years apart. So I think it's really important. I mean, I really truly think it's important that we're going to go and we're going to watch this few episodes that they have here, and hopefully, again, learn kind of a lot. And again, try to make parallels in history and stuff like that. And I think it can be very, very informative for us. So I really hope you stay with me through this little mini series and follow along when the videos go up and get a good discussion, good respectful discussion going on there, because history is so important in understanding how the world works today. It's one of my kind of mottos, and doing something like this is perfect example of that. So we're going to go ahead and get started. Now, before we begin, like always, I always want to promote the original video. The Extra History channel is amazing. They do awesome stuff. This video has been the most recommended thing that I've had in, ever since, especially since this stuff has gone on. And this channel is awesome. If you haven't, if you have subbed to them, great. But regardless, go down below in the description, click on the link so you can go to the original video and give them a like and view and all that stuff. All right, enough talking. Let's go ahead and learn about the most devastating pandemic of the modern era. And that is the 1918 flu, often called the Spanish flu. One thing I want to look at is why they call it
September 1918, Camp Devens, Massachusetts. The man on the autopsy table has turned blue. Dr. William H. Welch nods to proceed. His colleagues reach for the bone saw and begin to open the rib cage. The man's lungs are heavy. Welch and his colleagues lean in as they're opened. The lungs are so full of fluid that it's traveled up the trachea. The man had drowned in his own body, just like the others. Welch needs air. He opens the door and stumbles around men lying on the floor. There are no longer enough beds in the hospital. 6,000 men crammed in a facility meant for 1,200, and they're turning blue.
Wow. Blue, I'm assuming from the pretty much you're suffocating, right? So fluid buildup. Amazing. Now, one of the obvious things we look at when we look at this is its role within World War One, right? World War One goes from 1914 and the fighting till the very end of 1918. But the flu, I believe, goes from about 1918 to about 1920. So it kind of overlaps the war and was exacerbated by the war. And I'm sure they're going to talk about that a lot. But it does bring in the lesson about how wars can spread diseases.
This is a horror story, one of the most frightening in history. In 1918, a new disease emerged. We still don't know exactly how or where it first began infecting humans, but within months, it would spread across the planet, from the trenches of the Western Front to the most remote villages on Earth. It infected a third of the world's population and killed between 50 and 100 million people.
So look at that, how quickly that thing spread. And it's impossible, obviously, to like quarantine and stuff like that during the war. There's so much moving around. That's obviously the priority. So having something like this worst war that ever happened in history was horrible timing for this to happen. And also, of course, exacerbated it. So they said a third of the world had caught it at one point, and 50 to 100 million people died. Yeah, we've never seen. I mean, be honest, have you actually heard of this flu before? Maybe very much in passing, and it's pretty amazing because it killed way more people than the war actually did, right? But we often study wars because they're more, I don't know, exciting in a way to talk about. But this is one of the worst events that's ever happened. And does not get talked about. And I'll be honest, as a teacher, I have not covered it enough. It barely comes out in the curriculum, but it's something I think as a teacher for me, I need to explain a lot more. And I think going forward, once we're over kind of the current pandemic issue, will definitely be talked about more. It should be.
To put that in perspective, the low estimate would make it twice as deadly as World War I, while the high estimate would mean it killed more than both world wars combined.
Yeah, because you're probably looking at 100 million people for the wars, World War I and World War II. I mean, it's rough to estimate that, but if you are on the high side of the pandemic, that's amazing, because that's the two deadliest 30 years in history. I mean, obviously, it is. So if you count with the wars and the pandemic, that's like 200. If you on the high end of both of those, that's like 200 million people dead. That's a whole generation gone.
Between 3 and 6% of the global population died within 18 months. It was the first modern plague, turning our interconnected world against us by spreading through shipping lanes, rail lines, and the arteries of industrialized war. Yet it was also the first pandemic of the scientific age, where doctors could, to some extent, understand what was happening and stand against the infection, though they lacked the tools to stop it.
And that's I mean, okay, but even with being, because it's post-industrial, the entire medical industry changed with the Industrial Revolution. We live longer, we have more vaccines, we can mass produce stuff. So that's interesting, because think about what if this flu had come out before the modern kind of industrial medical era. Would this thing have been even crazier? You know what I mean? Because we wouldn't have had basic treatments. Not saying like the Black Death crazy, but nevertheless.
So in 1918, while researchers couldn't really see viruses, they knew such things must exist. They had no idea that, unlike the bacteria they could see in their microscopes, flu was not alive in any way humans understood it. Just a bunch of unstable genetic material that possessed a cell, forcing it to pump out billions of copies of itself. And with each cell infected, a minority of those new viruses mutated into something more infectious, more deadly. A microorganism that, through the randomness of natural selection, became progressively better at catching and killing as it passed through each host. In its wake, it altered a world war, drove languages extinct, and shattered the sense of invulnerability.
Drove languages extinct. I'm interested to see what that is. So I wonder if they're going to say that they were communities that spoke specific languages, very localized to them, that completely were wiped out. I haven't heard that. I'm interested to hear that.
That modern medicine had begun to cultivate. And when the nightmare ended, the world did what any person does when they wake from a dream. It forgot. But forgetting is something we can't afford, because
this video came out in 2018, 2 years ago. Good timing, huh? Saying, hey, we've already forgotten. Interesting, huh?
The virus that ravaged the world in 1918 is still out there, still mutating, and it will return. Yet, despite its impacts, we still don't know where the pandemic originated, but there are theories. Canada, 1917.
Angry Canadian noises.
Train races across the plains. Military guards are instructed to keep civilians away from the locomotive. If they see what's inside, there may be a riot. These cars, designed for cattle, contain the men of the Chinese Labor Corps, pawns in a political gambit. Until recently, the young, fragile Republic of China had remained neutral in the First World War. With so many foreign countries holding territory within its borders, joining the conflict risks making their homeland a battleground. But neutrality was not tenable. Japan, one of the allies, had used the war as pretext to move troops into Chinese territory and demand control of the Chinese government.
See World War II.
To thread the political needle, China had declared war on Germany. Hopefully, the other allies will now protect China from Japanese aggression and give it a seat at the post-war negotiating table. It may even get its occupied territory back. But to maintain a shred of neutrality, these Chinese recruits are barred from combat. They would dig trenches, lug ammunition, and clear minefields. So here they are, shipped to Canada, crammed on train cars, and traveling overland to a troop ship in Halifax. But there's something else among them. A respiratory disease that had ravaged northern China the previous year. A winter sickness severe enough that some victims coughed blood and turned blue. First, one recruit begins to cough, then another.
Oh, they're saying this started in China as well?
One by one, they fall ill with splitting headaches and chills. Crammed into the cattle cars, there's nowhere to run, nowhere to isolate the sick. They beg the guards to let them get off and seek medical attention. But due to the rampant anti-Chinese sentiment in Canada, the guards have their orders to keep the passengers a secret. By the time they reach Halifax, 3,000 have to be placed in quarantine. Doctors give the sick nothing but castor oil for sore throats and load the rest of the recruits onto the troop ships for France. Those men aren't sick. Yet. But flu victims are contagious days before presenting symptoms, meaning the British Empire has just delivered pandemic flu to the trenches. If that is, it was flu. Because another emergence is about to occur in the unlikeliest of places. March 4th, 1918.
Context. Last year of the fighting, America is now in. So yeah, end of the war. Already been millions dead by this.
Camp Funston, Kansas.
Kansas? How are they going to be involved?
Like every military base in America, Camp Funston is overcrowded. The second largest training center in the country, Funston's 56,000 men live in barracks and tents.
This was the hard thing about the United States joining the war is I want to say that right on the verge of the declaration of war, United States only had like 100,000 standing army, like was not even close to being involved into fighting, which when also why they did the draft so quickly, declared war, then within a couple months, got Congress to pass the Selective Service Act, thus requiring or mandating military service. And you could see why they had to try to get out as many people as quick as possible. So I could see why this would be so packed. And you could see where they're leading with this is when you have this types of proximity of people that are from a bunch of different places and also might be coming and going to places, maybe that warfare is going on, or just simply has been exposed to potentially these germs. You could see military bases like this being total breeding grounds for the spread of illnesses, diseases, etc.
Each waiting to be rotated to duty in the US or France. Diseases always break out when recruits muster for war, so it's no surprise when a private, a cook no less, reports for sick call with influenza. By noon, 107 other soldiers have joined him. Within 3 weeks, it'll be over 1,100. Alarming, sure, but this is wartime. Camp outbreaks happen. Even as 20% of the patients develop pneumonia and 38 die, doctors see nothing abnormal.
So that's interesting. They didn't see anything normal. They're just sick. Apparently that's just what happens. Okay.
But they're missing a key piece of the puzzle. A month before, and 300 miles away, the lone doctor in Haskell County, Kansas, had watched flu kill dozens of his strongest, healthiest patients. Its rapid pace and high fatality rate alarmed him so much that he contacted the Public Health Service and published an alert in the National Health Journal, but no one listened. The paper's obituary page was
ignoring the science. That's always dangerous, right? When you see that. And you can see with how distracting the war is. I mean, this really isn't priority one, with what's going on. You have this deadly war, deadliest war ever, and going on. So things like this are going to take a natural back seat in a way.
Was unusually busy that February, but alongside the reports of death and illness were heartwarming articles. Soldiers from Haskell County were departing for boot camp or visiting home one last time before deployment, all headed to Camp Funston, and from there to France.
So everything's funneling into this camp. That's bad.
2 weeks after the first case at Funston, 10% of recruits were reporting sick at 2 camps in Georgia. By the end of the month, 24 of the 36 largest military bases in America had cases, along with 30 major cities. No one noticed. Yet. Army Medical Department, Washington, D.C. Dr. William H. Welch was tracking an epidemic. One of the country's most famous doctors, Welch had helped drag American medicine into the modern age. He helped found the Johns Hopkins School of Medicine, spread the use of microscopes, and organized the Rockefeller Institute, the country's first dedicated medical laboratory.
The real heroes, right?
His work had helped transform America from a nation of country doctors to a titan of scientific medicine, able to compete with the Pasteur Institute in France and the Koch Institute in Berlin. Because of him, America had joined the age of the microscope and the vaccine, a bright world where doctors could both see diseases and kill them. The last few decades had brought vaccines.
Yeah! Smallpox, rabies, anthrax, diphtheria, meningitis. Take that.
Vaccines for smallpox, rabies, anthrax,
Yeah,
diphtheria,
nothing.
and meningitis. Researchers at the Rockefeller Institute were taking the first steps towards limb reattachment and organ transplantation. Some optimists even predicted a future without communicable disease. And America needed
Optimistic. Too bad we're not there.
that scientific power now more than ever. Even before the war, Welch delivered a message to the Army Surgeon General. When mobilization happens, you'll have an epidemic. You'll need to recruit the best doctors and microbiologists. You'll need researchers, train cars outfitted as mobile research laboratories, a stockpile of vaccines and antitoxins, anything to be ready. When the war started, the Surgeon General didn't bother.
I mean, you need that stuff anyways, regardless of if this flu was going on. You would need this stuff regardless. This seems like, as a kind of prediction, this is going to completely overwhelm the medical supplies when you have to deal with, natural things that happen from war and then this terrible outbreak, this pandemic.
Recruiting Welch and his researchers. He just enfolded the Rockefeller Institute into the Army. And here it was, the epidemic that Welch had feared. He could see it moving on the map from camp to camp, and it had killed nearly 6,000 already. He'd sent researchers to chart its spread and battle the secondary cases of pneumonia that were the real killer in most epidemics. They'd all warned the Army that this would happen if they overcrowded the camps. But no one listened. Welch had dispatched an experimental vaccine that fought one form of bacterial pneumonia, as well as a serum that cut the death rates by half. Results of the test looked good, if not 100% effective. It was proving a successful response. But there was a problem, because the epidemic that Welch was fighting to contain wasn't flu. It was measles. He'd seen reports of influenza spreading too, but influenza was seasonal, something that was expected and would go away. Doctors weren't even obligated to report cases to the Public Health Service. So the
You can see a lot of bad things going on. I know, hindsight's 2020 on things like this, but you're not reporting, not putting in the early stages, right? The early things that need to be done. But again, this is such a unique situation because there's this war going on, right? Like they need for the war effort to be good, they have to have these military bases that are just packed with people to train and get out there. And it's like, it's hard. Dealing with something like this during peacetime would be very, very different than what's going on there.
The prospect of a measles outbreak seemed much more serious, especially with recruits grouped together in training camps and 36,000 of the nation's doctors deployed in France. So as Welch fought measles, infected American troops boarded troop ships. They packed into the holds until each converted ocean liner held twice the normal load of passengers. They pulled away from the dock, waving farewell to families and loved ones on shore, and turned towards Europe. It was in the bloodstream now, not just of the men, but of the world.
Just, horrible timing there to see. So I'm interested. I mean, they didn't go into a ton of the origins. I mean, they were saying, it was all around is in China because they were bringing the Chinese Chinese people into the West that were bringing that in. But from what I understand today, this is still very, very unclear about a lot of its origins. And there's all this evidence pointing all around the place and a lot of disagreements. That's probably why, even because it's often called the Spanish flu, maybe they decided not even necessarily to call it that, although it's been kind of called that a lot, just because that oversimplifies things, because it's all over the place, even, again, the origins. So maybe it is a little bit more fair just to kind of call it that way. But yeah, you see one of the big differences probably today versus back then was the exacerbation of the war. Right, the war is what amplified it, as well as likely held back a lot of the preventative measures, because you couldn't train these soldiers and do all this while trying to quarantine people and separating them. So you can see how much bigger this would be, because the context is very different. And of course, what goes on, what's going on today. But yeah, so fascinating so far. So you're seeing that, and you could see there was some ideas about it, about how, it was going on, but you could see a lot of routine steps, that we would probably consider a lot more today since learning about this. Because again, history is hindsight 2020, history is 2020. You can sit there and look, oh, they should have done this and this, of course, but context is important here, and you learn and you go forward about how to do this. And I'm sure, after this, so much of medical policy has changed because of this. I mean, it's night and day. I mean, look at the preventative measures that go on today, and there was nothing even close to that before. So I'm interested to see a couple things. I'm interested to see of what comes out is what efforts they did take to try to limit the spread, and if they worked. And also, did this thing go through phases? Because that, I know that can happen a lot, which is you can put in these preventative measures, and I think this might have happened with them, but like you put in preventative measures and it slows down, and then and then it can come back. It can come back and be worse and stuff. So I'm interested to see kind of how the trend is of how the 1918 flu pandemic worked. Kind of looking at, I guess, a chart in a way of what they did, but and to see, of course, the historical context of World War One in there. So I think this is great. I honestly, like I said at the beginning of the video, I think it's really important that we study this. I think it really is, and I really truly hope that you follow along with here. You know, I don't care. This video might get demonetized or something like that. I don't care. I think this is really important for us to learn about as a precedent of modern pandemics, and us as history supporters, which I'm assuming you're here, especially if you're with my channel and you've made it to the end of this video. I hope you're in it for the long haul, because it's important. It truly is. All right. Okay. Good start to this series. Let's go ahead and wrap up here. So, original video, make sure you go down, whether you're subbed to them or not. Go click the original video link so you can go and at the very least give them the view. Like the video if you liked it, and definitely enable notifications if you want to continue on with me here. If you have not subbed and enabled notifications for my channel, so we can kind of go through this together, have good productive conversations, and learn about something I think that's really important. So yeah, definitely do that, and you can come join us. Okay, thank you to everyone that's supporting the channel, patron pledgers, channel members. Special shout out to you guys, but thank you just for being here no matter what and promoting history education. That's what we're all about here. Okay, we'll see you guys next time. Bye.